You're listening to Best Forevers, a podcast for kindred spirits, a podcast that encourages you to love more on your friends and to further consider the issues that plague friendships. I'm Alysa Lucas, and one of my favorite movie quotes of all time comes from that 80s movie, Steel Magnolias, from one of my favorite characters, Clary, played by Olympia Dukakis, and in that movie she says, quote, "Well, you know what they say. If you don't have anything nice to say about anybody, come sit by me," end quote. But wait, that's not how it's supposed to go, right? We're not supposed to say anything if it's not nice, right? Well, if that's the case, then why do we gossip? In this episode, I'm going to talk about gossip, what it is, how it can help friendships, and how it can hurt friendships, because maybe not everything is exactly as it seems, and sometimes everything is exactly as it seems. So what is gossip? Chatter, shop talk, news, fake news, slander, jibber-jabber, sharing the 411, spilling the tea, and shooting the shit. We've all done some of these before, am I right? So gossip is one of those activities that everyone says they hate, but usually participate in. In fact, a NPR web article from 2016 written by Tanya Lombrazzo says, quote, "By some estimates, around 60% of time spent in conversation with other people involves some form of gossip about social relationships or personal experiences," end quote. And so how's that for some cognitive dissonance, right? That we don't like it, we say we don't do it, but then 60% of conversations actually focuses on gossip. And so maybe some people don't realize they're engaging in gossip because they're not clear on the definition, or they assume that's, what the ladies do, right? The old ladies cackling in the hen house. The stereotype is often that women are gossips, and this is misleading. So let's break down what gossip is and how we can break down these stereotypes. Ralph Rossno, in his chapter, Rumor, Gossip, and Interpersonal Interaction and Beyond, a Social Exchange Perspective, describes 3 identifying characteristics of gossip. So basically, these are the 3 things that would indicate determining whether or not something is gossip. The first thing, gossip is situational. So if you're sitting in therapy and you're talking about your friend's boyfriend as part of dealing with whatever you're dealing with, that is not gossip, right? So oftentimes gossip can be packaged as, quote, idle talk that's just like passing the time at a party. But that would be gossip, right? You try to say, oh, it's just like chitter chatter, but that's what people do. But in some circumstances, like the therapist and other situations, it wouldn't be considered gossip. So you have to think about the situation you're in, the situation that you might be sharing information in, a situation where you might be gathering information in. So if, for example, you're in the workplace and you're reviewing candidates for a new job and you're talking about what they do and the skills they have and whether or not they fit in at the job, that's not gossip, right? So the second characteristic that we're looking at is that gossip has a moral or judgmental orientation with an evaluative tone. This tone is either positive or negative and is often connected to whatever event, action, or quote-unquote scandal is being discussed. So if you're talking about a friend's behavior of having a one-night stand and everyone's like, ooh, gossip, tell me all the details, well then there's an evaluative tone there, like having a one-night stand is problematic or is to be judged, or that you're evaluating it in either a positive or negative way. That in this case, it might be like, oh God, you know what she did? She had a one-night stand, right? That has more of a negative tone going on. And so that's what is important with gossip, is to consider the evaluative tone and judgment that might be going along with it. And not all gossip is negative, because you can evaluate with positivity too. And so we probably don't label positive communication as gossip because we see it as that, as positive, and that we generally think as gossip as something that's always inherently negative. And so it has those connotations. But when we're doing it, if you're talking about sort of the morals or norms that are reflective in character, then you're participating in gossip. And the chapter by Rossno talks about how we gossip about politics all the time. And this article, this chapter was written decades ago. So it's not even like, hey, the political climate now. No, it's always been that case with politics, that we participate in talking about people's morals or the norms or what's appropriate or what's their character or what qualities do they have, then that is gossip. Gossip is non-essential information in the interaction. So one of the things you have to consider is the content you're including legitimate, right? So if you're talking about a new friend with your family and then you go into their mistakes and all these things that they've done, is that appropriate for the dinner table? If it exceeds or crosses the lines of a context, it would be considered to be gossip. So if we go back to that example where you're reviewing candidates, if you start talking about them in other ways, like, well, I heard this about them, or did you know that she's married, and this, all these different things, then that would cross the line of what would be considered legitimate or appropriate for that particular context, that particular conversation. So this one is talking about going past the boundaries and that it's just excessive information for what you're talking about. In a 2016 Huffington Post article, Beth Weisenberger describes gossip starting, quote-unquote, innocently enough. For example, you could have experienced a conflict with a roommate right before meeting up for coffee with a friend. And as you share your day and what's happening, it becomes, you start talking about the roommate and the conflict, and then it turns into, she's so thoughtless. And your friend's like, I know, I never liked her anyway. I mean, I'm making that up, but, that might very well be how it goes. And so what happens is, it leads into talking about the roommate more than the conflict that just occurred. A coffee place with a friend is social. The friends likely share common beliefs about how one is a good roommate, or how a friend may conform to fit in and not cause problems during the discussion, and occur with just the two of them in the corner of the coffee shop, which seems private. So this is where gossip can occur and grow here. And this example has the 3 preconditions to gossip, as Rosno details in his chapter. And so we can see this. The first precondition is sociability. And so folks need to have, quote unquote, familiar to promote social interaction. So basically, we don't gossip with strangers, right? Like, it reminds me of the Friends episode where Chandler is getting married, and Chandler and Monica are getting married, and he wants her to tell her a secret that she had with Phoebe, and she's like, okay, I'll tell you a secret if you tell me a secret. So he tells her something like really personal about her brother Ross, and then she's like, oh, well, so-and-so at Phoebe's work is getting fired. And he's like, I don't care, I don't know them. And she's like, yeah, sucker, right? We don't gossip about people we don't know, because why does anyone care? So there has to be that sociable aspect, that familiarity, and that can be drawn together in particular situations that really can encourage gossip, like a small party, or maybe even a night watching movies together with a couple of friends, or even happy hour after day of work. So perhaps if we stay home with our cats and Games of Thrones, we'll never be in a social situation and then never be tempted by gossip. Autobiographical. Although this was my last weekend, and it was amazing. It's not very realistic. But if we go back to the example with the friend talking about the roommate in the coffee shop, a coffee shop does bring that talking over coffee. That's what you do. You do talk. And as NPR indicated, 60% of conversation is gossip. So at some point, you're going to talk about people, right? It can be positive or negative. In this case, with the roommate, it was negative. The second precondition is folks who, quote, share or conform to a common frame of reference, end quote, and thus may share or value conformity of attitudes and beliefs. So that sounds like, okay, I'm just going to conform to my friends. I'm going to think the way they think. But one of the things that we have to consider is that we might influence our friends more than what we're conscious of, or adjust in ways that we don't even realize. And so the way I think about it is when you spend a lot of time with people, you start saying the same words that they do. So when I was in undergrad at Michigan State University, I took this it was a silent film class by Professor Eric Lundy. And he is the only person in my life besides Sarah Jessica Parker on Sex and the City who would be like, fabulous. And so the more and more I took his class, just being around him, I started saying fabulous. And people were like, where did you get that? And I was like, oh, I didn't even realize I was saying it. And then I was like, shout out to Eric Lundy. Fabulous. So one of the things is we might not even realize that we are conforming to these things, or we spend a lot of time with each other, so we might conform in unconscious ways, right? And I think that people might consider that this sounds like young adults. Like, you're going to do whatever you can to fit in because you're trying to figure out who you are, what you like, and what you value. But I do think the need of inclusion can be central at any point of life as you transition to college, a new job, and more. So we do things like gossip to fit in, right? That's one of the things we do. And so one of the things that you can imagine is if friends meet over coffee that they might already have some similarities because they are friends, or that you're conforming to your friend because you don't want to make them feel bad or cause any trouble because you don't agree with them about their roommate. So you might participate in it for those reasons. The final precondition is, quote, a feeling of secrecy, privacy, or protection, end quote. Meaning that perhaps people may be more inclined to gossip if they think it will remain among folks chatting, or the person they're talking about is not likely to walk in, because how embarrassing is it to get busted by the person you're actually talking about? I mean, how many TV shows and movies is it where someone goes on and on, they're talking about someone, and the person they're talking to is like right behind you, right? Haven't we learned enough from media that when you start talking about people, that's when they show up? So it is embarrassing for the person gossiping, but it might be even more embarrassing for the person who's being talked about. And so that might keep people from gossiping in the first place. But when you're in your home with your best friends or drinking some wine, there's nothing more private, right? So there is that feeling of, oh, I can gossip here because who's going to find out? Ferguson's not telling anyone, right, buddy? Yeah, my cat's not going to tell anyone. Doesn't matter how much fancy feast you give him. So Rousnow and Foster on the American Psychological Association webpage talks about the difference between gossip and rumor. And I will be talking about rumors in a future episode, and Rousnow calls that gossip's cousin. But in that article, these authors talk about gossip occurs because of shared history and common interest. And those are some of the very important markers of friendships. It seems like because of this, because of the privacy and keeping secrets, that there are just friendship markers that exist that would indicate that gossip is going to happen, or that it just happens because that's what friends do and you don't even label it as gossip. I think that's very well possible. So that's something that we have to keep in mind, is that gossip might happen in a lot of different conversations or relationships, but because of these markers, because of these preconditions, that lend itself really well to friendship and how friendship is defined and seen by people, right? Friends are supposed to be non-judgmental. They're supposed to be there for you. They're supposed to social support. They're supposed to listen and accept and show interest in what you're saying and keep your secrets and all kind of stuff. So, and you get together and talk, sociability. You have a common frame of reference, your friends, a feeling of secrecy or privacy. Well, this is my friend in this quiet location. Of course, we can talk about things, and likely gossip is going to happen. But we've all heard that women are gossips, right? Research detailed by Yeager, Skelder, and Rousnow, and the chapter Who's Up on the Lowdown, Gossip and Interpersonal Relations, indicate that this is a perception held by both men and women about women, and that women are more often seen as more malicious gossips than men are. But both men and women engage in gossip, and the differences may lie with men focusing on gossip related to task, in which is both individualistic and competitive, whereas women focus on relationships, which is both cooperative and includes mutual support. So to understand gossip, I think it is important to understand the sex differences, because in friendships that we can see differences that women might be more likely to get together to talk, just to talk in the coffee shop, for example. Men might get together and you might find that they're gossiping while they play video games or they do some other activity together. So I found this really neat article by Eckhouse and Ben Hyder in 2019, and it was in the Journal of Gender Studies. And the focus of their study was reviewing the differences in gossip based on gender. So the goal of their study was to explore 3 essential hypotheses or questions. The first one is, who gossips more, men or women? And certainly the stereotypes would say women, right? In fact, their article talked about in the 20th century, anytime a woman talked, it was considered to be gossip. I'm like, so when I talk to Ferguson about his fancy feast, gossip. I talk to my coworker about doing a task, gossip. If I do talking about a movie with my brother, gossip, right? So that's really interesting. So this has been a long time coming in terms of the history of the stereotype. And so I appreciate that these authors are doing recent research on this so we can figure it out for now, or with this particular set of participants, and that maybe we need to do more research in the future. So the second question was, do women talk more about relationships and physical appearance, and do men talk more about achievements? That's sort of broken down by what you would imagine, and that's what previous research would say. Physical appearance is the one addition that I haven't mentioned yet, but women are more likely to talk about that historically, so they're including that here. And then the third question is women's gossip less positive than men's gossip? So in the study, which you can find in my show notes, you can go through their methods. They use both quantitative and qualitative methods, and here's what they found. First off, who gossips more, men or women? Well, there was no significant difference between the amount of gossip for men and for women. So to say that women are gossipers, no, men participated in too, is just a perception or a stereotype. Second, do women talk more about relationships and physical appearance? Yes, they do. So that was confirmed. But what wasn't confirmed, there was no significant difference for men and women when it came to gossip about achievements. So that might be something that both men and women talk about. And so historically, if you think about it, achievements might have to do with the workplace. And if women were in the home, they might not talk about that as much. But now that there are so many women in the workplace, as many as men, if not more, or, I actually don't know the numbers. But there are far more women in the workplace, so that it is something that they're probably more likely to talk about as well. But there was no difference. And then finally, they looked at, is women's gossip seen as less positive? And what they found was that actually women use more positive descriptors when they were gossiping than men did. And additionally, overall, they found that physical appearance descriptors were really not used. And so if they were typically seen as more positive. Or they're nice looking. I like the way that they dress, right? So that could be gossip, but everyone always assumes that it's bad. And it could be like, I really like the way that she does her hair. Next time I see her, I need to ask her how she does it. Like, there's lots of things that people are talking about that we often don't label as gossip. So one of the other interesting findings from the study was there was a resistance to gossip. And the article states that 60% of those who objected were male. So this could support the idea that culturally gossip is not seen as socially appropriate and that it's seen as, quote unquote, women's talk. The hens in the hen house, am I right? The chitter chatter, the empty talk of idle talk. So I think that this recent study is particularly important to understanding gossip. And as the authors cover in their discussion, that these stereotypes about gossip and gender, quote, create hostility and suspicion against women, end quote. So it is important to sort of bust these myths, because then we can think about gossip in a more accurate light, in a different way. And if we have a better understanding of it, we might be able to recognize when it's good for us and when it's bad for us, when we're doing too much of it, when we might need to do it for the workplace, that we actually could be more thoughtful in being able to recognize it and be able to use it and know when to stop and know when it's toxic for relationships. So that's where I wanted to go next. So now that we know what gossip is and sort of breaking down some of the more popular stereotypes as it relates to gender, I want to talk about the positive features of gossip and how that can actually help friendships. So gossip isn't all bad though, right? In the NPR article I mentioned before, quote, gossip can help solidify personal relationships and encourage cooperation. No doubt many of friendships have been created by sitting down right next to someone like Clary at a party in Steel Magnolias. As described before, complaining or venting may lead into gossip, like with the roommate, complaining about the roommate in the coffee shop. And then it might be a quick way for people to bond. So have you ever met a friend by complaining about the same classmate, a shared friend, or a coworker? It's like the movie Step Brothers when they're like, did we just become best friends? Yup. Because bonding over shared annoyances is a quick way to become friends. And I know you're thinking like, really? Is that how we make friends? But have you ever stood in line and both been irritated with something and then you're like, you're okay, I like you. We went through this battle together at the line in the grocery store. That when we can find something to hate, find something to complain about, find something to talk about that's positive. Maybe friends have goals in which to focus on something positive in their life, and so they're talking about celebrities that do that same thing, maybe blog or podcast or are acting or singing. Then we gossip about celebrities a lot. And in Frank T. McAndrew's January 2016 Psychology Today article, gossip can be viewed as a skill. Now, how many of you are out there listening going, gossip is horrible and no one should do it, let alone teach people how to use gossip in a skillful way? I mean, I'm all about competent communication, but if it's used for bad instead of good, then that seems problematic. But according to this article, there's positive aspects to it. So according to McAndrews, quote, sharing secrets is one way for people to bond. Okay, we know that one. And sharing gossip with another person, now this is interesting, is a sign of deep trust. You're signaling that you believe that the person will not use this sensitive information against you, end quote. So I've talked about several times that one of the markers of friendships is keeping confidences, keeping secrets, being able to be trusted by your friends. And one of the ways to showcase that, to demonstrate it to someone else, is to share sensitive information with them, saying that I trust you with this, and do you trust me with it? And then maybe having a gossip sesh and then not sharing it with anything, you might feel more comfortable to do that again because we have this bond and we trust each other. But the NPR article said gossip encourages cooperation. So how the heck does that happen? They talk about in the article, quote, more generally, though, gossip could be important in establishing and communicating an individual's reputation. Ooh, reputations are so important. And a good system for monitoring reputation can in turn help foster cooperation. And McAndrews agrees, and he indicates that successful gossiping, because again, it's a skill, entails being a good team player and sharing key information with others in ways that won't be perceived as self-serving. It's about knowing when it's appropriate to talk and when it's probably best to keep your mouth shut, end quote. So one of the things is reputations, and we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get to the negative features of gossip. But our reputations sometimes are all we got. And as soon as it's damaged, it is so hard to get it back to where it was. So if someone smears or damages our reputation on purpose or through gossip or rumors or other ways, it's going to be hard for us to gain any of our reputation back, whether the information that was shared was true or not. And so it's one of those things that it's being cooperative means I'm going to help maintain your reputation. You can help me maintain mine, and that a skillful person will know when to share information, when not to share information, to know when it's going to hurt someone, when it's not going to hurt someone. So according to these articles and this research that, gossip can help us maybe fend off some of the negative. Like we can help protect each other's reputations. Like that's all we got. So let's work together to maintain those and keep those intact and not damage people's reputations just willy-nilly, right? Just like, see what happens today, right? So I think this is an important positive to it that the NPR article talks about encouraging cooperation in kids as young as 3 to 5. And so I think that gossip is something that is used to develop and through socialization of young people into adults. And if they're socialized in which to cooperate and to be skillful and to share information when it's critical and to not when it can be hurtful, then that is actually socializing people to be really good at some things that can be helpful in the workplace, can be helpful in relationships. I mean, there's the downside to everything, but I mean, that's a silver lining. So Rossno talks about the functions of gossip, which I think continue to highlight some of the positive nature of gossip. The first function is that it's an informational tool. So this is a way to gain knowledge about the community. And so some of the articles I looked at talk about how, and I'm going to use this, in the olden days, and I'm not talking about my parents' days, I'm talking about way before that, okay, we didn't have TV, we didn't have celebrities, we didn't have all these things where we can constantly talk about politics and everything that's going on and it's trending on Twitter and so on and so forth, but that communities were small and people's activities were getting to know each other and know each other's private information, and it really helped you knew who was part of your community. And in some cases, that might be helpful to survival. And so I think that's still the case, that getting to know people or learning about people, you know how you can fit into the community, how they fit into the community, what sort of impact they can have. So for example, when you get a new job, if someone tells you, hey, that manager is like this, da-da-da-da-da, and you're like, oh, well, the first thing I would say is maybe don't trust everything people tell you, right? But it might be, you might be cautious and you might observe like, okay, they said they're a real stickler for people being on time, so you're sure that you're early. And when you start to notice that maybe the manager does, praise people who are on time and writes up people who are late, then that information was helpful to you and it gives you knowledge about that job in the community, just as an example. But I also think it might be when you come to college and it's like trying to figure out how you fit in, that can also be very informative. The second function is influence. And okay, this one isn't as positive, but this is where it's to control attitudes and actions. And so I'm not in the business of manipulating people. I think that, as I mentioned before, when I would say fabulous, that I was being influenced, but I wouldn't say that Eric was like, I have to control her action. I want her to say this. I want fabulous to become the new term, that everyone uses in 2002, right? So I think that sometimes influence can happen, and it's generally from positive interaction with friends or with other people. But there's also a bad side of it. The third function is intimacy, and this is to establish and maintain relationships. And so this goes back to, all the different articles before, NPR, McAndrews, all talking about creating the relationship. This is how you learn to be social. This is how you can make friends, maintain friendships. Later, we'll talk about ending friendships. And this is also one of the preconditions of gossip, right? Having that sociability, right? Having something in common, right? That privacy. So I think this intimacy function really is sort of the meat on the bones here in terms of what's positive. There's also some talk in the Rosno chapters about social comparison theory, and this is where gossip allows its participants to obtain needed comparisons of information in an indirect way. Maybe this is an extension of the informational function, but it does allow us to go, okay, so, how many people do that? So how'd you do on the exam? Oh, I did pretty good, but this person didn't do so well, and this person did this way. And you're like talking about your classmates and what you heard, and then you're trying to figure out where you stand in the situation. Sometimes we do that, and that might help people, might motivate people to do better or to know that they're doing okay. But that's a very self-focused positive. Like, that's not necessarily good news for the person who's being talked about, right? And so that'll go into the negative features. Similarly, Yeager et al. Also describes two functions of gossip that overlap here. To maintain the unity of the social group. So gossip is a way to enhance the group, to showcase in-group, out-group. And in-group is a really strong way to communicate that you're in it together, that you're part of this culture, you're part of the group, you're part of this friendship system, whatever the case might be. And then they also talk about to enhance self-esteem or status in that social group. And so, again, it's one of those things where it's like, this is great for me, but it's not so great for the person I might be talking about, because I can enhance my self-esteem, but it might be at the expense of other people. So in this case, it might be a short-term positive and that there are going to be consequences later. But you can also, I think of Regina George from Mean Girls, like her status in her social group is based on talking about people. And for some people that's seen as good, other people see that perhaps as the influence function and to control attitudes and actions. It might depend where you're coming from, but I would say overall, again, it's one of those things where it might be positive for you, but you might have to think about the greater good. According to a March 2nd, 2018 Cosmopolitan article by Julia Paczewski, there are 4 reasons why gossip can actually be good for us, which is, again, this is all interesting. It can help you let off a lot of steam, so venting and that sort of thing, but remembering that can become gossip. So if you're venting, you might be gossiping. 2, it can help you spot bigger red flags in a friendship. So if you're talking about something that annoyed you about someone, you might start to notice other things about them, and you can evaluate whether or not the friendship is one to maintain or keep. So it can be sort of like perhaps a checks and balance. But one of the things you have to keep in mind is that not all the information you might be getting about a person might be accurate. It can make your annoying friend a better person. And I have several asterisks on my notes for this one because, as I talked about in episode 70, Annoying Friendships, that annoying people aren't always purposeful or intentional in their annoying behaviors, and that a lot of times the person who is annoyed is actually much more problematic in their communication. So in this case, it's almost like the person's like, well, I'll get them, I'm going to talk about them. But if you talk about things, there is something where people can learn about the norms and the values of the group. So it is going, okay, well, I hear them talking about this. I do this. That's annoying. I'm going to stop doing it. And so people might use gossip as a way to sort of indicate what is appropriate behavior for a group or not. And then it can also teach you what not to do, right? So as you listen to people gossip, because it's 60% of conversations, right? Like, does it teach you anything about ways you should behave, ways that you should not, things that you should say, things that you should not, when you should say things, when you should not say things? That gossip might help us sort of navigate communication as best that we can. So there's a lot to unpack here with the positives, right? There's some clear things where you're like, yeah, I've done that before, where I'm trying to fit in the workplace. And so I talk a little bit about the boss with other people to make bonding, and it's not the end of the world. I'm sure bosses assume that, their workers are talking about them, and I need to make friends. I'm from out of state, and I have a new job, and I'm just trying to fit in, right? But some other things are, again, might be positive for you at the time, but might have consequences for other people. So I don't think all these positive features are necessarily something that are long-term and are always positive. And so I think it's really interesting to think about gossip as a skill, and to think about how, based on how to know gossip or when people are gossip or how to gossip more appropriately, that you can learn when to speak and when not to speak in the workplace that can be helpful, or in a friendship group. Like, this is information you need to know, but you don't need to know this because this would be embarrassing to someone, or this is relevant, this is not relevant. I think in that case, it can showcase that we can learn a lot about communication by knowing about gossip. But there are some things where it's like the influence function to control attitudes and actions, and thinking about enhancing your own self-esteem, your own status, or the unity of your particular group might be at the loss for other people. It might be bad news for the person you're talking about, for the people around them, witnesses or people who hear the gossip. There's lots of other things that can happen. So that leads us into, what are the negative features of gossip? And so why do people gossip? I talked about the positive reasons, but we need to consider the consequences for the gossip, the target of the gossip, their relationship, and the gossip's relationship with others. So the gossiper's relationship with others. Because there's a lot going on. It's more complex than, it's just idle talk while passing the time between classes, or, I'm watching TV and we're just texting back and forth and we're talking about people. That's not this, we have to think about all the different levels here. So as I was talking about with reputation, gossip ruins others' reputations, and reputations can be hard to fix once damaged. And I think this goes into the idea of using gossip to judge people. So how many people have we judged based on something that we've heard about them from someone else? And then when you get to know that person on your own, they were completely different. So one of the negative consequences is that we use gossip to not only ruin people's reputation, but we judge people based on the things we hear, whether they're accurate or not, or whether the evaluative tone was positive or negative. And we might need to consider that talking to the person one-on-one will actually get to know them better than, hearsay by someone else. People who hear or witness the gossip may have a negative perception of you. So some people might gossip, and again, it can be positive or negative, when they're with friends and, they're just having a good time. But then there's some people that have more of an addiction to gossip, and they might do it in every single relationship or every time they're talking to people. And that can really make people think negatively towards you, or to view you in a different light. And so that repetitive behavior, of course, would be that if you gossip with me about someone, you're probably gossiping about me with someone else. And so that is something to consider, because it might be addiction. Some people gossip to feel superior to others. And those sorts of things, like addictive behaviors or superiority, are not typically behaviors others enjoy, right? It's negative. It brings people down. It makes people feel icky. And so that is something to consider with gossip. And as I was preparing this, I was thinking of this quote: when they stop talking to you, they start talking about you. And I think this is really interesting, how gossip can be used if someone is envious of another person. So you could be friends with someone, for example, and then they stop talking to you, and you might never know why. And then you might learn that there was some competition between you that you didn't know about. And so instead of talking to you about it, they're talking to other people about it because it makes them feel better. So if friends are part of the same pool of candidates for a new job and one friend gets the job, the other may gossip to others to feel better about themselves, right? And so there might be some self-esteem issues. So of course, there can be a hit to self-esteem. And so when you might use gossip to do that, but it can hurt your friendship, because if you're not talking to them and you're talking to other people, then the quality of that relationship is going to deteriorate. Gossip also excludes people who aren't in the inner circle. So people gossip to fit in or to be part of the group, as we've discussed. And okay, a positive point might be that you can confirm that you are in fact part of this group, and that might feel really good because that is a basic human need, is the need for inclusion. But is the in-group where you want to be? Sometimes being in the out-group is awesome. So that might be something to consider, is that through gossip, are you excluding people, and maybe that's where people want to be? And I would say, let's be inclusive of others. I love friendship. Let's include other people. Gossip can destroy trust, especially if you breach a confidence. So who would trust you if you continuously share and talk about someone's private information? Sometimes people gossip to get attention and might not even consider that there will be consequences for sharing a friend's secret. So many times has that happened to someone where you're in a situation where you're trying not to be brought down by someone else. There's a lot of pressure in the situation. The other person has more power than you. You're trying to fit in. And so you might just tell them something to fit in. And then actually what you do is talk badly about your friend. And then at the time, it might have been relieved the situation for you. But then later, when you realize what you've done, that can be problematic. People gossip for control or power, like Regina George. And so that can obviously cause a whole host of problems in the workplace, in school, in friendship groups, etc. And we have to consider these things because workplace bullying might be associated, gossip might be one of the things that people do. Gossip is hurtful and humiliating depending on information shared and whether or not the friend believes that you would actually talk about them behind their backs. Like, I would expect that I'm not saying my friends talk about me, hair flip. I mean that because people are people and people are talking, and that 60% of conversations are gossip. I will assume that other people are talking about me and that they might assume the same about me. But again, making it clear doesn't always mean that it's negative, right? But if you do something negative and your friend is like, I never thought you would talk about me, and this is just absolutely the worst thing that could have happened. I've never felt so hurt in my life. It was humiliating for these other people to know this information and know that you're the person that gave it to them, right? So that can be really problematic. And another thing to consider is that it can all take place online. Yay! If it takes place in text form or online, one of the things you have to think about is screenshots and documentation for a very long time. And not only is there documentation, but that is documentation that can go back and be shown to someone that you did this thing or you said this thing. And yikes, that can cause the breakdown of our friendship, right? Because all of this, obviously it destroys trust, but all of these things would be violations of a friendship, quote unquote, rules, the norms of friendship, what we expect of friendships, the markers of friendship. So all of it is going to be pretty problematic. Weisenberger from the Huffington Post article describes gossip as completely toxic. And so how many of you would agree? She would suggest that venting about one's roommate over coffee is actually gossip. It doesn't actually address the issue, and they're not confronting the roommate. And gossip is used to manipulate listeners because we're only sharing our side of the story. Although I see the toxic sides of gossip, like Weisenberger, and I would agree to some degree that, venting can become gossip. Again, it starts so innocently. And that it might be not direct in how you're going to handle the problem, but sometimes people might need to say it to get off their chest, and then they figure out what to do, and then they go confront the person. Okay, that might be a process, right? Everyone gives their side of the story. So some people use that to manipulate people. Other people are perception is reality. So they're giving their perception. They believe that might be the truth, right? That's their truth. And so they might not see it as being manipulative because we're always going to share our side of the story. So I do believe it's toxic, but I do believe there are things about it that can be helpful and can be positive, can enhance and create relationships. And for that, I don't think we can completely just say gossip is gone, let's just get rid of it. I think that there are things, much like anything in life, there's positives and there's negatives. How can we enhance the positives and decrease the negatives? How can I be skillful in it? And again, it's not being like, I'm the most skilled gossiper and I can talk all this shit and no one will ever know. Like, that's not going to happen. But if I can be skillful in knowing what it is, when it might need to be used, how I can do it appropriately, how can I do it while protecting my friends' confidences and not making my friends look bad, then I'm going to be a more competent communicator, and that might be a good thing. If I can avoid the negatives, enhance the positives, I might be a better communicator. So in the end, what can we do? So I think it's important to understand gossip so we can recognize it when it's the innocent enough type talk among friends or a way to vent or bond, and then when it is truly toxic in friendships. You can avoid gossipers, right? But it might be the case that we all are at some point or another. You can give people a chance beyond what you've heard about them. I think that's important for all of us to do, right? That we don't judge people based on what we heard. And we can consider whether or not the gossip is likely to spread. So the information I have, is this something like people are going to be like, ooh, scandal, I'm going to share it. And then it turns into a rumor, right? And then it starts getting spread and the information changes. Then that might be something that you can go, maybe I shouldn't share this. So these might be a couple things you can do individually to try to decrease gossip. But also consider gossip is not always bad. And we all do it because, as Rosno says, relationships are fundamental for gossiping activity. People need people to gossip with and about, end quote. So have you experienced gossip in your friendship, whether positive in that it helped develop a friendship or negative in that it damaged your friendship? If you've had either of these experiences or something in between, feel free to share it with me at bestforeverspod@gmail.com. I'm likely to share it in the future, and feel free to share any rumor stories too, because I will be covering gossip's cousin rumors in the future. So until next time, friends, think about that juicy gossip you're about to share, because without our friends, who would we be? Thanks for listening to Best Forevers. If you like what you hear, be sure to subscribe, rate, review, and of course, share with a friend. Please be sure to follow Best Forevers on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Best Forevers Pod, and I'm at Dr. Alysa Lucas on Twitter. You can always find the podcast webpage for more information at bestforeverspod.com, and share your stories of friendship by emailing me at bestforeverspod@gmail.com. And if you'd like to support the movement to love on our friends more, check out the podcast on patreon.com/bestforeverspod. Now, friends, check out this recommended podcast that you must get in your ear holes immediately.
Hey, this is Liz.
And this is Heather.
And we are Nerdy Bitches Podcast.
A show where two geeky ladies podcast their way through pop culture.
From movies and TV to our regular book club and everything in between, we bring you our favorite fandoms with a feminine eye.
We're talking Star Wars, Star Trek, Harry Potter, DC, Marvel, comic books, and anime.
And don't forget sci-fi, fantasy, action movies, video games, D&D, board games, and so much more.
Be sure to check us out on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Podbean, or wherever you find awesome podcasts.
You can also find us hanging out on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, and at nerdybitches.com.
Talk to you soon.